Hey, what's up guys? Joker here. If you remember yesterday we covered the launch news surrounding Polaris and the AMD RX 480, which I'm really excited for to see what it could do as a $200 graphics card. And during that show, they actually showed two of the RX 480s in Crossfire versus a single GTX 1080 in the Ashes of the Singularity benchmark. And as I had noted in that last video, there were some discrepancies between the screenshots there when looking at them side by side. Here we have the RX 480 on the left and the GTX 1080 on the right. And we can see some differences here between the two. We could see some differences in the shaders and the snow, things like that. And this benchmark is randomized somewhat, so we should expect some variances, but probably not to the amount that we are seeing here, as that was said by Robert Hallock, who came forward and put out a statement after he had gotten back, I guess, from Computex, and said, you know, the system specs they're running on i7-5930K, 32 gigabytes of RAM. So we're talking an X99 system here. Not going to really see any significant bottlenecks there. And both of the systems were running, or not systems, I should say, both graphics card configurations were running on the crazy settings on Ashes of the Singularity at 1080p with 8 times MSAA. So that's really the big thing here, is a lot of people wanted to know, like, were these running on the same settings? Because that's a very big deal. They need to be running on the same settings if we're expecting to see, expecting to derive any sort of, credible information out of this, if they're actually running at the same settings. So the RX 480s in Crossfire got an average of 62.5 FPS at the crazy settings at 1080p, while the GTX 1080 got an average of 58.7 FPS. So about a 6.5% difference there between the two setups. So very impressive for a $400 card, especially when it's $400 cards, I should say, in Crossfire, especially when it's going against a $700 GPU that was just released by Nvidia. So regarding that controversy of the screenshots, Robert Hallock had this to say. At present, the GTX 1080 is incorrectly executing the terrain shaders responsible for populating the environment with the appropriate amount of snow. The GTX 1080 is doing less work to render Ashes of the Singularity than it otherwise would if the shader were being run properly. Snow is somewhat flat and boring in color compared to shiny rocks, which gives the illusion that less is being rendered, but this is an incorrect interpretation of how the terrain shaders are functioning in this title. So that's really important, because the nitrous engine, which is used for Ashes of the Singularity, which is made by Oxide, accounts for about 30% of a given frame's workload, which is a massive chunk of the performance. And according to them, the developers of the game, that's how games going forward on DirectX 12 are going to be made. So it's kind of setting the battlegrounds here as, who's going to be the more powerful solution going forward in the future. While, Nvidia may be edging out now in things like DirectX 11 performance, and maybe only just slightly in DX12, because AMD hasn't really come out with their big, home run hitter Vega, which we're not going to see until the end of the year. So how does that really set up Nvidia going forward with the GTX 1080 if we're expecting Vega towards the end of the year, which if AMD stays the course, they're going to have vastly superior async compute performance on GCN versus Nvidia. So that's one thing I want to keep track of for sure. And this DirectX 12 is going to be, it's the way of the future. I think there's no doubt about that. We're not going to sit here back in time on DX11 titles forever. So the last thing I wanted to draw your guys' attention to here was just comparing really quick the GTX 1080's benchmarks that AMD reported getting 58.7 average FPS to some other benchmarks here that reported the GTX 1080 on that same crazy preset was getting an average of 60 FPS. So 1.3% difference there, which is really within the margin of error that I would expect to see on benchmark runs and variances in systems with CPUs and things like that. So all of that taking into account, 1.3 FPS difference is pretty close. So I would say that it seems AMD's numbers are correct, at least on the GTX 1080. With the RX 480, we're still going to have to wait to see until those come out and people can actually test them and we have the full specs on those particular cards. But I do hope that we can test it out for you guys here on the channel. It's a very exciting graphics card, being able to hit that $200 price point. It's really, really cool. And this news video is being sponsored by Slant.co, who I actually went over to really quickly, and I searched AMD because I was curious to see if they had anything on this news topic. And sure enough, they had the RX 480 here, which I was going to bring up because they had the pros and cons on here. This is like a crowd-sourced review site, so people actually upvote on stuff, like if they agree with it or disagree with it. They said the pro on the RX 480 is the Nvidia 1080 and 1070 have better price to performance, but cost a lot more than the RX 480, which is priced at $199. So I don't think I would really agree with that one right there. I would probably disagree with better price to performance on the 1080 and 1070. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about this, though, and if you want to go over to slant.co and vote on this, then go do that and check out our sponsors, as I'm sure they'd appreciate it, and as I would as well. And I will see you guys in the comments for a discussion on all of this story and everything, and I will catch you guys next time. Ta-ra.